Imagine waking up to find your car missing, not stolen, but illegally towed by a woman who isn't even your HOA president. She's just a power-hungry busybody who's convinced she rules the entire neighborhood, even over homes that aren't part of the HOA. But here's the kicker. When she tries to fine, threaten, and even steal from the wrong homeowner, she makes a huge mistake. Because this guy, he's not just going to fight back, he's about to completely destroy her little dictatorship, expose her scams, and make sure she gets the ultimate dose of karma. And trust me, you're going to want to see how this one ends. Buckle up, because this is one HOA Karen story you won't believe. Hello beautiful people. Before we dive in, a small click from you can help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Hit that subscribe button and be part of the journey. Let's go. Karen had always believed she was born to lead. From the moment she moved into the neighborhood, she treated it like her personal kingdom. She wasn't content with just being a member of the HOA. No, she needed to control it completely. With a sharp eye for detail and a clipboard that never left her hands, she roamed the streets as if she were on patrol, ready to strike down anything that didn't meet her impossibly high standards. For the actual members of the HOA, life had already been frustrating under her rule. She fined people for minor infractions like having the wrong shade of blue on their shutters or using the wrong type of garden gnome. But what made Karen truly unbearable was her belief that her authority extended beyond HOA boundaries. In her mind, anyone living nearby was automatically under her control. And that's when she set her sights on OP. OP lived just outside the HOA's jurisdiction. His house was close to the neighborhood's entrance, which in Karen's mind meant it was practically an honorary member of her domain. The problem was OP had no intention of following rules he never agreed to. He loved his home, enjoyed working on his car in the driveway, and occasionally hosted backyard BBQs with friends. These things were completely reasonable to everyone except Karen. The first warning signs came in the form of passive-aggressive notes taped to OP's door. The first one read, "Please keep your property up to HOA standards. Unkempt yards lower property values." OP chuckled, tossed the note in the trash and moved on with his day. Then came another, accusing him of violating quiet hours because he had music playing in his backyard one evening. The music had been at a reasonable level, but Karen didn't care. Soon the notes escalated to direct confrontations. One afternoon, OP was cleaning his car when he heard an exaggerated throat clearing behind him. He turned to see Karen standing there with her arms crossed, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning his driveway like a prison warden. "You know," she began, her voice dripping with forced politeness, "this kind of activity isn't allowed per HOA guidelines." OP raised an eyebrow. "I'm not in the HOA." Karen blinked as if the statement physically hurt her. "Excuse me. My house isn't part of the HOA. I don't pay dues and I don't follow your rules." For a moment, Karen seemed to struggle with reality itself. Then she squared her shoulders, determined to find a way to exert control. "Well, even if you're not a technical member, you live close enough that your choices affect the neighborhood. You need to be respectful of the community." OP smirked. "I am. That's why I don't go around telling people what to do." Karen's face flushed, but she didn't back down. Instead, she stormed off, muttering something about reporting this. He figured that would be the end of it. He was wrong. The next morning, he found an official-looking envelope taped to his front door. Inside was a letter, complete with HOA letterhead, stating that he had been fined $500 for an unauthorized vehicle maintenance violation. He laughed out loud. She had actually gone through the effort of printing out a fine, hoping he would just pay it. Shaking his head, he walked over to Karen's house and knocked on the door. When she opened it, she had an expression of someone who believed she had already won. "Hey Karen," OP said, waving the letter. "Just wanted to let you know you sent this to the wrong house. I'm not paying this." Karen's smile faded. "The fine is non-negotiable. All residents are expected to comply." "I'm not a resident of the HOA." She scoffed. "That doesn't mean you're exempt from being a good neighbor." OP let out a short laugh. "There's a difference between being a good neighbor and being controlled by someone who has no authority over me." Karen's expression darkened. "If you refuse to comply, further action will be taken." OP grinned. "Great. Can't wait to see what that means." Walking away, he expected the situation to die down. But Karen wasn't the type to let go. Days later, OP started noticing a strange pattern. A group of people, Karen's self-appointed HOA patrol, began monitoring his house. They walked by with notepads, whispered among themselves, and even took pictures of his property. When his garbage cans weren't brought in within an hour of pickup, a note appeared on his door demanding he follow HOA waste disposal guidelines. When he had guests over for a backyard barbecue, Karen accused him of violating HOA event regulations. It became a game. OP started doing things just to mess with them. He parked his car half an inch outside of what Karen considered an acceptable spot. He mowed his lawn at 7 a.m. just to give them something to complain about. And when he threw a party, he set up a massive banner in his yard that read, "Non-HOA members welcome." Karen, seething, decided it was time to escalate. One morning, OP walked outside only to find that his car was gone. Confused, he checked with his neighbors, but no one had seen anything suspicious. Then he spotted a small note taped to his mailbox. "Your vehicle has been towed for violating HOA parking regulations. Contact random tow company to retrieve it." OP's eyes widened. Karen had actually towed his car. But there was one massive problem: she had no legal authority to do so. Realizing just how far she was willing to go, OP didn't just call the tow company. He called the police. When the officer arrived, OP explained everything, showing the letter, the previous notes, and proof that his house wasn't in the HOA. The officer took one look at the situation and sighed. "She towed your car without permission? That's illegal." With the officer in tow, OP marched over to Karen's house and knocked firmly. She opened the door with a triumphant smile, which quickly faded when she saw the police officer standing next to OP. "Ma'am," the officer said, "did you authorize the towing of this vehicle?" Karen hesitated but then lifted her chin. "As head of the HOA, I have the right to enforce our parking rules." The officer flipped through the documents OP had provided. "He's not in your HOA. You have no authority over his property." Karen's face turned red. "But the officer held up a hand. "The towing company was misled into taking his car under false pretenses. That's vehicle theft. You're going to need to call them right now and get his car back before we start filing reports." Karen's confidence crumbled. She fumbled for her phone, calling the tow company while OP watched in satisfaction. The company, now realizing they had made a mistake, agreed to return OP's car free of charge. But the damage had been done. Karen had overplayed her hand. She thought she was untouchable, that she could manipulate anyone into following her rules. But now she was facing real consequences. And OP wasn't done with her yet. The humiliation of being forced to return OP's car should have been enough to make Karen back off, but it only fueled her obsession. She had been publicly embarrassed in front of her beloved HOA and worse, in front of the police. Now she was determined to make OP's life miserable. OP knew the battle wasn't over when he spotted Karen's HOA patrol lingering around his house more frequently. They weren't even subtle about it anymore. People would slow walk past his driveway, phones in hand, taking pictures of everything from his mailbox to the type of flowers in his yard. It was comically ridiculous but also infuriating. One evening, OP was enjoying a quiet drink on his porch when Karen herself strutted up his walkway, clipboard clutched in one hand, a smug grin on her face. "You've been warned," she announced dramatically. "You refused to comply with community guidelines, so further action has been taken." OP raised an eyebrow. "Further action?" Karen reached into a folder and pulled out another letter, handing it to him like it was a court summons. OP unfolded it and read the bold statement at the top: "Notice of lien placement on property." He laughed. "Karen, are you out of your mind? You can't put a lien on my house. I'm not in your HOA. She smirked. "Your house may not officially be in the HOA, but your behavior affects property values. The board has voted and we have filed the necessary paperwork to ensure compliance." OP stared at her, amazed at the sheer audacity. He knew this was fake, but Karen was banking on him not knowing how liens worked. "Let me guess," he said. "I can pay a fine to have this removed?" Her smirk widened. "A small donation to the HOA fund would certainly help." OP shook his head. "This is fraud. And I'm going to prove it." Karen, unfazed, gave him a condescending look. "You can try." OP wasted no time. The next morning he took the fake lien notice straight to the county clerk's office. As expected, there was no record of a lien being placed on his property. It was nothing more than a scare tactic. But OP wasn't just looking to prove Karen wrong. He wanted her to pay for trying to intimidate him. He asked the clerk if someone could be investigated for filing fraudulent claims or impersonating an HOA authority over non-members. The clerk's interest piqued, and they directed him to a legal office that handled property disputes. Feeling victorious, OP returned home only to find Karen and her patrol standing at the end of his driveway, whispering and watching him like a group of schoolyard bullies. He waved at them with an exaggerated smile which only made Karen's face darken. Later that evening, OP decided to mess with them. He set up a small, completely legal lawn ornament, an obnoxiously bright neon pink flamingo, complete with sunglasses and a tiny sign that read HOA Free Zone. The next morning, the flamingo was gone. OP was both annoyed and amused. Karen had officially escalated to theft. He checked his doorbell camera footage and sure enough, there she was, creeping onto his lawn at the crack of dawn, snatching the flamingo and hurrying away with it clutched under her arm. This time, OP didn't even confront her. Instead, he printed the image from his camera, posted it in the neighborhood Facebook group and captioned it, "Beware. The HOA president has a deep hatred for flamingos. Keep your safe ***. The post blew up. Neighbors, both in and out of the HOA, began commenting, sharing their own Karen horror stories. People OP had never spoken to suddenly started stopping by, venting about their frustrations. Karen, furious, tried to get the post taken down, claiming it was defamation, but the damage was done. Her reputation was crumbling and OP had only just begun. A few days later, OP woke up to another surprise. His water had been shut off. At first he thought it was just a utility issue, but after checking with the city he discovered something unbelievable. Someone had requested the shutoff on his behalf. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind it. Karen had gone from writing fake fines to towing cars to outright messing with essential utilities. OP wasn't just dealing with an overzealous HOA president anymore. He was dealing with someone who was committing actual crimes. He filed a report with the police, providing evidence of the fraudulent lien, the car towing incident, and now the unauthorized utility shutoff request. The officer he spoke to didn't laugh it off this time. The situation had escalated beyond neighborhood drama. Meanwhile, Karen had no idea that her world was about to collapse. She was still operating under the belief that OP was just a stubborn neighbor who could eventually be forced into submission. She hadn't considered the possibility that OP was meticulously documenting every move she made. The final straw came when OP received an actual court summons. Karen, desperate to regain her footing, had taken legal action against him, claiming he was a public nuisance and violating community harmony regulations. That was when OP decided to go for the kill. He countered her claim with a lawsuit of his own. Not only did he have proof of the fake fines, fraudulent lien attempt, illegal towing, stolen property, and utility interference, but he also had something even worse: evidence that Karen had been pocketing HOA funds. One of the frustrated neighbors from the Facebook post had tipped him off. Karen had been adjusting HOA fees and using vague expenses to justify why some dues had increased. With a little digging, OP found receipts and payments that didn't add up. Now it wasn't just about revenge. It was about exposing her completely. Karen's smugness finally faltered when she was served with OP's counter-lawsuit. She had expected OP to back down, to be intimidated by the legal system like so many other homeowners had been. But instead he was coming at her with everything. Word spread fast. HOA members started asking questions. A few people even requested financial reports, something Karen had always managed to avoid providing. The carefully constructed world she had built, where she ruled with an iron fist and no one dared to challenge her, was cracking. And OP knew that the Real storm was only just beginning. The HOA meeting was supposed to be routine, but this time the room was packed. Homeowners, both in the HOA and those just outside of it, had gathered in unprecedented numbers. There was a buzz of anticipation, whispers passing between neighbors. Something was about to happen and everyone knew it. Karen sat at the front, posture stiff, clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. She had always dominated these meetings, steamrolling any objections with her practiced speeches and self-righteous attitude. But tonight felt different. OP sat near the back, arms crossed, waiting for the perfect moment. Karen called the meeting to order, clearing her throat as she attempted to reassert control. She began with her usual condescending tone. thanking everyone for their commitment to maintaining the integrity of the community. Then she went straight for OP. One of our biggest concerns remains non-compliance with HOA guidelines, she announced, eyes scanning the room, lingering just a second too long on OP. Some individuals, despite repeated warnings, continue to act in ways that are disruptive to the values we uphold. OP let out a short laugh. Karen's eyes snapped to him. Is there something amusing? OP stood up. Actually, yeah. There is. He pulled out a folder and walked to the front of the room. Because for someone so obsessed with rules and guidelines, you seem to have a real problem following the law yourself. Karen's expression faltered for the first time. Excuse me. OP didn't answer right away. Instead he turned to the audience. I wasn't going to say anything at first. I figured Karen was just overstepping a little, that maybe she just took her role too seriously. But then she started issuing fake fines. Then she had my car towed. Then she tried to place a lien on my house. Asterisk asterisk, a house that isn't even in this HOA asterisk asterisk, and when that didn't work? She shut off my water. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even those who had been loyal to Karen seemed taken aback. Karen forced a laugh, though her voice wavered. This is ridiculous. I had nothing to do with that. OP held up a printed email. This is the water shutoff request. Guess whose name is on it? Karen's face went pale. And that's not all, OP continued. Because I did some digging. Turns out Karen hasn't just been harassing non-HOA members. She's also been stealing from the HOA. The room fell silent. OP placed several documents on the table in front of him. I got a tip from a fellow neighbor. One of you actually, who noticed some discrepancies in the HOA fees. Some people were paying more than others, and when I looked into the financial records, I found payments that didn't make any sense. Money being withdrawn for things that don't exist. HOA funds being sent to a private account. Murmurs turned into outright discussions as homeowners leaned toward each other, flipping through the documents OP had placed before them. The treasurer, who had always trusted Karen, picked up one of the statements, his face growing increasingly red as he scanned the numbers. Karen was shaking her head furiously. This is absurd. You can't just accuse me of things without proof. Oh, I have proof. OP smirked and pulled out his phone. He played a recording, one from a phone call he had with a local contractor. On the recording, the contractor could be heard saying, "No, I never did work for the HOA. I sent Karen an estimate for a fence repair, but she told me not to worry about it and still paid herself from the HOA fund." The room erupted. Several HOA members stood up, shouting over one another. You stole from us? I've been paying extra dues for nothing? We trusted you. Karen looked around wildly, her control slipping completely. This is a misunderstanding. I did what was best for the community. OP shook his head. No, you did what was best for you. The HOA board members huddled together, speaking in hushed but frantic voices. The treasurer, still gripping the financial statements, turned to Karen with pure rage. Effective immediately, you're removed from your position. Karen stumbled back. You can't do that. One of the board members scoffed. Oh, we can. And we will. But you should be more worried about the fact that we're pressing charges. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then turned on OP. This is your fault. I just exposed the truth, OP said with a shrug. You did this to yourself. The meeting dissolved into chaos as neighbors bombarded the board with questions about what would happen next. But OP wasn't interested in the cleanup. His work was done. Karen, however, wasn't finished. She stormed out of the meeting, but not before shouting over her shoulder, "This isn't over." OP smiled. Oh, I think it is. A week later, Karen's downfall was complete. The HOA board filed an official complaint against her, opening the door for legal action. Homeowners who had been overcharged demanded refunds, and some even threatened lawsuits of their own. But the worst part for Karen? The IRS had taken an interest in her financial records. One evening, as OP relaxed on his porch, he saw a moving truck in front of Karen's house. She stood outside, arguing with a man who looked like a lawyer. She was selling her home, forced to cover legal expenses and repay what she had stolen. As she turned toward OP's house, their eyes met. He raised his glass in a silent toast. She turned away, got into her car and drove off. Karen had ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist, but in the end her greed and arrogance had been her undoing. And as OP sat back enjoying the peaceful evening, he knew that for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood was finally free. With Karen gone, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, as if an oppressive fog had finally lifted. For the first time in years, people weren't walking on eggshells, afraid of receiving an arbitrary fine or waking up to yet another ridiculous demand from the HOA. Homeowners who had once been too intimidated to speak out were now sharing their own horror stories about Karen, and the entire community felt like it was collectively healing from a long and exhausting nightmare. OP had no official stake in the HOA's internal affairs, but that didn't stop the newly reformed board from keeping him in the loop. The financial audit revealed that Karen had siphoned tens of thousands of dollars from the HOA fund. Fake invoices, non-existent repairs, and a slew of personal expenses hidden under vague community improvement labels. She had been using HOA money to cover everything from spa visits to online shopping sprees. The fallout was even worse than anyone had expected. Several homeowners, furious at being deceived for years, banded together to sue Karen personally since she had used her own name on certain transactions. She was directly liable for some of the stolen funds. On top of that, the IRS had flagged her for potential tax fraud, considering she had failed to report the extra income she had secretly funneled into her personal accounts. Karen had no way out. The lawsuits drained whatever savings she had left, and legal fees quickly piled up. The moment she put her house on the market, word spread like wildfire. No one in the neighborhood was sad to see the for sale sign go up, and when the moving truck finally pulled away, people actually gathered outside to watch. OP made sure to be front and center, lounging on his porch with a cold drink in hand as Karen drove off for the last time. With Karen out of the picture, the HOA went through a complete transformation. The new board immediately began rolling back many of the ridiculous rules she had enforced. The absurd approved lawn decorations list was abolished, meaning people could once again have gnomes, flamingos, and whatever else they wanted in their yards without fear of a fine. But the best part? The refund checks. For years, Karen had been overcharging residents with bogus fees, pocketing the extra cash. Now, with the financial audit complete, those affected got their money back. It wasn't a huge sum per person, but it was enough to make a statement. Karen's reign had been fraudulent from the start. To celebrate, the community decided to throw a block party, something Karen had always discouraged in favor of her boring, overly structured community engagement meetings. This party was different. People brought out their grills, set up tables in the cul-de-sac, and for the first time in ages, the neighborhood actually felt like a community again. OP, despite technically not being part of the HOA, was treated like an honorary guest. Someone even handed him a custom-made sign to place in his front yard. HOA free zone, a nod to his battle against Karen's overreach. He proudly planted it in the grass, knowing she would have absolutely lost her mind if she were still around to see it. As the night went on, neighbors swapped stories about Karen's ridiculous antics. One elderly couple revealed that she had once tried to fine them for having their Christmas lights up past January 2nd. Another homeowner admitted that Karen had threatened to have their cat removed for being too disruptive because it liked to sit on the sidewalk. The stories were endless, each one more absurd than the last. But no story was as satisfying as what happened to Karen after she left. Word eventually got around that Karen had moved into an apartment complex in another city. One that, ironically, had an even stricter HOA than the one she had run. Unlike before, she wasn't the one in charge. She was just another tenant, forced to follow the very kind of rules she had once forced on others. The irony was almost too perfect. According to someone who still kept tabs on her, she had already racked up several warnings from her new HOA for things she had zero control over. One report claimed she had been fined for having a doormat that was deemed too colorful, while another incident involved her getting into a shouting match with the actual HOA president when they told her she couldn't hang a bird feeder on her balcony. The ultimate poetic justice came when she tried to run for a board position in her new HOA, likely hoping to reclaim her lost power. But her reputation had preceded her. Somehow, a few residents had discovered the details of her past scandals and spread the word before the vote. When the election results were announced, Karen had received exactly 0 votes. It was the final, undeniable proof that her days of control were over. Back in OP's neighborhood, life moved on. The community thrived without Karen's interference, and for the first time in a long while, the HOA functioned the way it was supposed to, without unnecessary drama or corruption. And he enjoyed his well-earned peace. One afternoon he was out mowing his lawn when a neighbor walked over, laughing as he pointed at the HOA free zone sign in OP's yard. "Man, I bet she's still losing sleep over that," the neighbor said, shaking his head. OP smirked. "Good. She deserves it." As he continued mowing, he couldn't help but think about everything that had happened. The battles, the pettiness, the sheer absurdity of it all. But in the end, the outcome had been worth it. Karen had thought she was untouchable, that she could bend the world to her will. But karma had other plans.